faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world.
Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk.
Today, we continue with the wartime Third Reich, Part 1. We covered how Nazi Germany shaped a new European order through racism, including bloody massacres of other ethnic groups in Europe, and the persecution of disabled people in Germany. In the next part, we'll see how this racist European new order collapsed. How did the German people reflect on it? Here, it's still divided into 4 parts for our discussion. Part 1, the German people's resistance and opposition to the Nazi regime. Part 2, the collapse of Nazi Germany's ideology. Part 3, the failure of the Nazi new economic order. Part 4, the German people's reflection on Nazi racism after the war. First, let's dive into Part 1, the German people's resistance and opposition to the Nazi regime. In 1941, Germany reached its military peak. Despite that, the German army couldn't defeat Britain on the Western Front and suffered consecutive defeats against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. By February 1943, the German army was defeated in the Battle of Stalingrad, and the situation took a sharp downturn. Military failures caused a huge shift in German attitudes toward the Nazi authorities. This change mainly showed in 3 ways. First, disillusionment with Germany's future. Second, resisting racism. Third, resisting the rule of Hitler's Nazism. The German people's disillusionment with Germany's future. It was starkly evident after the Great Air Raid on Hamburg in 1943. Hamburg was Germany's second largest city then. From July to August, the Allies launched 4 waves of air raids. Hamburg suffered devastating damage. 56% of homes were destroyed. Over 160,000 people were killed or injured, and 900,000 were left homeless. After the raids, Nazi authorities arranged special trains and trucks to evacuate Hamburg citizens. However, many Nazi officials not only fled, but also commandeered these vehicles to move their relatives and property. This act finally angered the public, and people openly blamed the Nazi Party for bringing disaster upon Germany. Whoa! Some even built gallows and hung Hitler's portrait on them. Yet, behind the anger lay deep fear and despair among the German people. Many Germans worried, if Germany lost the war, what fate would they face? Amid this disillusionment, people began reflecting on and resisting Nazi racial atrocities. During the Nazi era, some Germans did openly support racial policies against Jews, but most German people weren't like that. According to observations by U.S. and Swedish diplomats in Berlin, the vast majority of German people felt sympathy for the Jews. For example, the Nazis required Jews to wear a yellow star on their clothes so they could be easily identified and constantly discriminated against. But many non-Jewish Germans ignored the Nazi rules. When they met Jews on the street, they not only greeted them friendly, but even actively apologized. When riding trams, some Germans even gave up their seats for Jews. The Nazis gave Jews very little food rations. However, many German shop owners still broke the rules to provide more food to Jews. As for the Nazi authorities' actions to exterminate Jews, the German people often held critical attitudes, and even some Nazi Party members thought it was too cruel. Oskar Schindler was one such Nazi Party member. You're probably familiar with this name. He's the real-life inspiration for the protagonist in the movie Schindler's List. Schindler owned a factory in Poland, employing 1,100 Jews for forced labor. Later, out of sympathy and guilt, Schindler used up his wealth and connections to successfully protect these Jews, allowing them to survive.
Besides sparing no effort to rescue Jews, there were other Germans who worked hard to expose the Nazi authorities' genocide crimes to the world.
Kurt Gerstein, an SS disinfection expert, was one of them. In 1942, Gerstein was ordered to deliver disinfectant to a concentration camp in Poland. Upon arriving at the camp, he learned that these chemicals were used to poison and kill Jews. After witnessing the horrors of the gas chambers firsthand, Gerstein was deeply shaken.
After that, he did everything he could to spread information about Nazi Germany's racial massacres.
Gerstein revealed the Nazi crimes to diplomats from Sweden, Switzerland, and the Holy See, but all efforts were in vain. Finally, he wrote 3 separate reports on the Nazi genocide actions. After the war ended, he handed them over to the Americans. Despite this, Gerstein was still imprisoned for war crimes. In July 1945, unable to bear his inner guilt, he hanged himself in prison, beyond individual resistance to racism. Furthermore, there were organized resistance movements. Participants in these movements were very diverse, including communists, social democrats, and even high-ranking Nazi officers. Resistance groups of all kinds continuously emerged, ranging from ordinary citizens to government officials. The White Rose organization is quite representative. Its members were mainly students and professors from the University of Munich who opposed Nazi racial atrocities. Between 1942 and 1943, the White Rose produced numerous pamphlets distributed randomly to the public, condemning Nazi racial massacres and criticizing German citizens' indifference to Nazi atrocities. And, right, they even publicly wrote phrases like, "Hitler is a mass murderer" on Munich's public buildings. Similar resistance groups existed, but they clearly couldn't shake Nazi rule. The resistance groups with real power to overthrow the Nazi regime were military factions. This group included many high-ranking German officers, such as heads of military intelligence and admirals. They disapproved of Hitler's reckless military expansion. Some young aristocratic officers who fought on the Eastern Front witnessed Nazi racial massacres in Eastern Europe and joined out of moral outrage. It wasn't. On January 8, 1943, representatives from various resistance factions held a joint meeting to stop Hitler and Nazi atrocities.
Despite major differences preventing consensus, they ultimately coordinated an assassination attempt against Hitler.
On July 20th, 1944, Count Klaus von Stauffenberg of the military resistance visited Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters and planted a bomb. After the bomb detonated, some officers at Army headquarters launched a military coup in Berlin, attempting to overthrow the Nazi regime in one decisive move. Simultaneously, resistance cells in Prague, Vienna, and Paris stood ready to support the Berlin operation. This was the most serious and widespread conspiracy Hitler faced since seizing power in 1933, even involving Field Marshal Rommel. And although Hitler survived and the operation failed completely, this assassination attempt exposed the Nazi Party's true nature. The Nazi Party never enjoyed widespread support across German social classes. In national free elections, the Nazi Party never won more than 37.4% of the vote. It was only the early military victories in Warwig that masked public dissatisfaction with the Nazis. As Germany suffered continuous military defeats, public discontent finally expressed itself in various forms. Facing resistance and even opposition from the German people, Hitler and the Nazi regime intensified their extreme rule. One approach was strengthening ideological control. This is also the key focus of Part 2. During World War II, under propaganda minister Goebbels' control, Nazi propaganda seemed omnipresent. But Germans were tired of its excessive politicization, which Goebbels fully understood. Therefore, he set more realistic propaganda goals to make people persist in fighting and ensure compliance with Nazi demands, even if superficial. In this regard, the Nazi regime's control of the film industry was most exemplary. During the war, movies were very popular among Germans, but what truly interested people weren't the features. It was the newsreels shown in theaters. Starting November 1940, German cinemas were required to show a newsreel before every film. And these shorts were filmed by German frontline photographers and journalists, edited together, lasting up to 40 minutes, usually shot within 2 weeks before screening. And due to their timeliness and authenticity, they were hugely popular, with each edition reaching 20 million viewers in Germany alone. Of course, German soldiers in these shorts were always portrayed as heroic and fearless, which deeply influenced audiences.
When seeing frontline victory reports, some viewers would even shout, "Heil Hitler!"
Goebbels greatly admired the propaganda impact of these newsreels. To amplify this, he ordered production of major films to spread Nazi racist ideology. Jed Seuss was one such film, adapted from a Jewish author's novel. The original portrayed Jew Suss as an 18th century moneylender, falsely accused and hanged. The author intended to highlight Jews becoming scapegoats.
However, in the film, Suss was depicted as a villain.
He extorted money from honest Germans and raped a beautiful German girl. Due to convincing performances, the film had a powerful impact on audiences. Some viewers jumped up during screenings shouting, "Get all Jews out of Germany!" Jed Suss was released on September 24, 1940, aimed at supporting the Nazi authorities' expulsion of Jews in Poland. The film ending with Suss being hanged symbolizes the fate of Jews at that time. After 1942, the Nazi authorities directly controlled German film companies, boosting the industry's hardware support. However, disillusioned Germans were no longer moved by newsreels or racist films. To ease public anxiety, Goebbels shifted to demanding entertainment films.
In 1943 alone, over half of German films were comedies. Still, amidst the entertainment, Goebbels kept pushing political propaganda. In 1943, he ordered the film Kohlberg to promote Nazi Germany, claiming it would rise again even if defeated.
He even personally wrote dialogues for the film. But to Goebbels' surprise, this film became the swan song of Nazi propaganda tools. On January 30, 1945, Kohlberg premiered in Berlin. By then, Germany was devastated, almost no one watched it, and its impact vanished. Beyond film, the Nazi authorities tightened ideological control in news publishing, theater, radio, and even art. But like in film, no propaganda could hide Nazi Germany's decline or inspire Germans. Nazi Germany reinforced its extreme rule. Besides tightening ideology, they built a new European economic order. This is part 3's focus. When mentioning European economic order, you might think of the EU. Actually, during World War II, Nazi Germany tried to create a new European economic order, but it was purely for Germany's war efforts. So, as early as the winter of 1941, during the Battle of Moscow, Nazi industrialists investigated and found Germany's resources far inferior to the UK, US, and Soviet Union, unable to meet military needs. To achieve industrial catch-up, Germany turned to the European nations it controlled. These regions had 290 million people, with pre-war GDP exceeding the US, France, and the Netherlands, plus vast overseas colonies. That's why Hermann Göring, Germany's wartime economic chief, proposed enhancing cooperation with European nations to establish a new order, creating an economy encompassing all European countries for easier resource plundering. Specifically, Nazi Germany implemented 3 so-called economic cooperation policies in Europe. First, manipulating currency exchange rates. At that time, though many European nations were occupied, their currencies weren't abolished. Economic exchanges still required currency conversion. Germany manipulated rates to give the Reichsmark unfair advantages. For example, its purchasing power in France was 60% higher than normal, prompting German women to send money to husbands or sons in France to buy daily goods mailed home. Parcels to Germany surged to 3 million via military post. Germany's second policy was import trade on credit. Again, taking France, Germany imported massive goods through French companies, but they bought on credit with no intention of repayment. By late 1944, Germany owed France 8.5 billion Reichsmarks. Germany's final economic cooperation policy was inflation. Germany forced central banks in occupied nations to overprint money, causing severe inflation. Thus, occupied nations' currencies devalued, while the Reichsmark appreciated, allowing Germany to continuously import their resources. This cooperation left them with severe shortages and collapsing economies. Additionally, Germany coveted enterprises in occupied nations. After occupying Western Europe, Germany avoided war reparations but charged occupation costs to fund troops stationed there.
By late 1943, France owed nearly 25 billion Reichsmarks in occupation costs.
With such massive debts, Nazi Germany encouraged France to transfer company shares as payment.
Key French firms controlled oil extraction rights in Romania and copper mining rights in Yugoslavia. These companies' shares were massively transferred to Germany as occupation costs, ending up in Nazi-controlled German firms. Ultimately, Germany's goal in enhancing European economic cooperation was continental self-sufficiency to sustain prolonged warfare. Beyond strengthening so-called economic cooperation, Germany also reformed its own economic management system. On February 8, 1942, Albert Speer, Hitler's close confidant and top Nazi official, took charge of Germany's economic affairs, initiating rationalization reforms in economic management. Rationalization reform meant improving production methods and optimizing operational structures to boost efficiency, providing sufficient military supplies for the war machine. Rationalization reform. First, it began in specific technical fields. Here, submarine production optimization serves as an example. Early in West End War, Germany used submarines to intercept Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, posing major threats, but suffered heavy losses and couldn't meet demand. To boost submarine production efficiency, Speer appointed an automobile manufacturer in 1943 to reorganize the assembly process. This manager divided each submarine's manufacturing into 8 independent departments, each producing standardized components. He hired another company to ensure timely component production, assembling complete submarines at a centralized factory. Production structure optimization significantly improved German submarine efficiency. Production time dropped from 42 weeks to just 16 weeks. Next, rationalization was applied to industrial restructuring. Early in the war, German arms production was scattered, complex, wasteful, and inefficient. And to solve this, Speer collaborated with industry leaders to drive rationalization in arms manufacturing. He partnered with Erhard Milch, Luftwaffe chief, centralizing aircraft production in few mega-factories under unified standardized systems. Milch concentrated resources on one fighter model. Manufacturers dropped from 7 to 3, yet output surged from 180 to 1,000 units. Nazi Germany's new European economic order strengthened its economy to some extent. Germany obtained vast resources from occupied nations, while Speer's reforms optimized their allocation. By 1944, German arms industry efficiency rose 50% over 2 years, yet this new order still couldn't meet demand. Allied production far outpaced Germany's. From 1943 to 1944, Germany's annual aircraft production reached 40,000 units, yet it was less than 1/5 of the combined output of the US, UK, and Soviet Union. Germany produced nearly 6,000 tanks yearly, but Britain and its dominions exceeded 6,000. Soviet output surged to 19,000, and America reached 29,000. Why did Germany, operating at full capacity, ultimately fall behind? Reasons include Nazi market distortion and disregard for economic laws, plus a crucial factor: Nazi Germany treated laborers inhumanely. Since World War II began, Germany faced labor shortages in military, industry, and agriculture. Especially after the Soviet-German War erupted, severe troop losses forced conscription of industrial workers, worsening labor scarcity. To compensate, Nazi Germany forcibly recruited vast foreign laborers. By war's end, 8 million foreign workers were conscripted, over a quarter of Germany's workforce. These laborers endured brutal conditions. Polish workers, branded inferior, received far lower pay than Germans. Soviet laborers were confined to lice-infested shacks, surviving on bread and broth, suffering severe malnutrition. Oppressed and cheap, these workers lacked motivation, crippling German productivity and hindering new weapon development. Late in the war, Germany developed advanced weapons like V-1 flying bombs and V-2 rockets, but they failed to turn the tide, partly due to foreign labor issues. Building V2 production sites, Nazis established forced labor camps, conscripting prisoners from USSR, Poland, and France who daily battled disease and starvation. By 1944, when V2 sites were completed, 20,000 of the 60,000 laborers had died. Relying on such slave labor to produce sophisticated V2 rockets inevitably compromised quality. Most V2s missed targets throughout, prompting historians to quip that more people died producing them than were killed by the rockets. At this point, the fate of Nazis' new economic policy was predictable. By 1944, Germany's war spending had reached 75% of its GDP. To meet frontline demands, authorities shut down non-military factories across Germany, slashed civilian food rations, enforced shift work, pushing production to its absolute limit. Yet Germany couldn't gain any advantage in the war, and public discontent kept rising. Nazis' new economic policy had completely collapsed. All right, that concludes part 3 on the failure of Nazi Germany's new economic order. Now we move to the final part. The German people's reflection on Nazi racism. Nazi Germany's intensified ideological control and new European economic order couldn't reverse their defeat. On April 29, 1945, the Soviet Red Army stormed Berlin's center. Hitler committed suicide in his bunker the next day. In his political will before dying, Hitler remained deluded, claiming Jews started World War II and his genocide was retaliation. Ben Bun also remained. He even urged Germans to strictly follow racial laws and mercilessly resist the poisoners of all nations, meaning international Jewry. Yet few Germans were willing to die for Hitler's Nazi racism. News of his death met widespread public indifference. No one publicly wept for their once beloved Führer. Not even expressions of sadness were seen. When Nazis first rose to power, most Germans didn't recognize violence as Nazism's core tenet. Hitler and the Nazis enforced genocidal policies through violence, attempting to revive Germany and dominate the world. Though many Germans felt uneasy and guilty, they chose silence. They'd supported Nazis, believing Hitler would restore Germany's glory, never expecting they'd reap devastation instead. In 1933, when Hitler took power, Louise Solmitz, an ordinary Hamburg teacher, was a staunch Nazi supporter. 12 years later, she was unrecognizably changed. Solmitz condemned Hitler as the most despicable, shameless failure in world history. He believed that no nation had ever so fervently supported such an evil cause, so intensely driving itself into the embrace of destruction. It wasn't just the Nazis who failed, but also the Germans. Many, like Solmitz, underwent ideological transformations. Thus, Nazi Germany's racist order not only collapsed across Europe, but also completely crumbled in the hearts of its former supporters. On May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany officially surrendered, ending World War II in Europe. Yet for most Germans, liberation remained far from achieved. Germans struggled to mentally adapt to the new reality, particularly freeing themselves from the burden of Nazism. To eradicate Nazi ideology, the Allies established international tribunals after the war to try Nazi war criminals. Top Nazi figures like Goering and Speer, among 22 major criminals, were mostly punished. German society also launched denazification campaigns, prosecuting Nazi accomplices domestically and purging Nazi influence from culture, publishing, economy, politics, and judiciary. And, for individuals, denazification was a long, painful process. Suddenly rejecting over a decade's meaning and values wasn't easy, especially while suffering war's devastation and admitting complicity in grave crimes. For example, Melita Maschmann was a leader in the League of German Girls, a Nazi youth organization. After the war, she was imprisoned. Maschmann grew up dominated by Nazi ideology. She once firmly believed Nazism was a grand vision about race, reviving the Greater German Reich and European unity. During imprisonment, she refused to accept Nazi Germany's racial genocide crimes. Only years later, aided by religious faith, did Maschmann gradually shed Nazi ideology. She began reading reports about concentration camps. Finally, she had to admit these reports described reality. thus completely abandoning Nazi ideology.
Overall, denazification succeeded.
In Germany, publicly expressing Nazi views became taboo. Those showing Nazi sympathies faced dismissal. By 1968, a new generation of Germans had grown up, completely cutting ties with Nazi ideology. Although some groups still revived Nazism through neo-Nazi political movements, the number of Germans supporting this is pitifully small. After Germany's reunification in 1990, the German people became more peace-loving, supportive of democracy, prosperous, and stable, with deeper reflection on Nazi Germany's racist crimes. In the early 21st century, Germany built a large public memorial in central Berlin for Jewish victims of Nazi racism, and survivors of Nazi forced labor received financial compensation. And in German historians spare no effort exposing Nazi Germany's crimes, and companies that profited from Nazi policies opened their archives, admitting they were Nazi accomplices. Nazi Germany, or the Third Reich, ended. It showed in extreme form the consequences of human hatred and destructive desires reaching their peak. Through bloody facts, it revealed the disaster from combining racism, militarism, and authoritarianism. However, the author suggests the Third Reich won't vanish completely. At the book's end, the author poses the ultimate question. In situations we're forced into, do we choose to yield or resist, to act or not act? All right, that concludes this book on the wartime Third Reich. The book notes are below the audio. See you next time.